Hello and welcome to Disastrous History. Today we're going to talk about the 1955 24-hour Le Mans disaster. If you don't know, the 24-hour Le Mans is a 24-hour car race. Quite literally, the cars run for 24 hours straight from the afternoon of usually June 10th to the afternoon of June 11th. Now, the winner of this is usually whatever car is still running or is in first place at the end of 24 hours. The first one took place in 1923 in Le Mans, France, and it always takes place in Le Mans. So to give you an idea of where this race stands amongst Europeans, it is similar to the Daytona 500 and the Indy 500. It is on the level of legendary races in Europe. Everyone wants to win the 24-hour Le Mans. And it's a different kind of race than, say, the Daytona 500 or the Indy 500, where you just have to drive fast for 500 miles. We can do that. That's what most European racing was in Grand Prix. It was drive your car as fast as possible for the set amount of miles. Usually takes 2 to 3 hours. And the runners of Le Mans, the people in charge of Le Mans, wanted to come up with a way to test not only the driver's endurance, but the car's endurance, because it's hard to make a car go really fast for 500 miles, right? That's difficult, but it's even more difficult to make a car continuously go fast at a very high level for 3,200 miles, which is about what it takes to win the 24-hour Le Mans today. That is a significantly higher level of engineering and understanding of vehicles and being able to take care of a vehicle. And when it first started, it was 2 hours, or two drivers. They would switch off because obviously even in 1923, driving for 24 hours straight was known to be patently unsafe in a time when we did patently unsafe things all the time. And then in the 70s, it became teams of 3 drivers. So usually one will drive for 8 hours or 8 hours and then 8 hours and then 8 hours. Back then it was 12 hours and then 12 hours. But essentially, you want to go as far as possible in 24 hours. So before we get into the actual crash, let's talk about what the track looked like in 1955. So you start here at the pitch straight, and you travel in a clockwise direction around the track. First, you go through the Dunlop curve, then the S's, which is essentially an S curve, then the Tertre Rouge, before you head onto the Mulsanne straight on the back stretch. Now, this was a very, very straight stretch of track that was 3.7 miles long that people spent the entire time at full throttle all the way down. Now, this caused 2 deaths of cars that drove into the walls on either side and killed the drivers. So in 1990, they added a curve here to make people slow down. The top speed on this 3.7 mile straight stretch was about 253 miles per hour, which is very, very fast for the cars at the time. Now, if they did this in a current Le Mans, it would probably be somewhere around there, maybe close to 280. So they added a curve here. But after that, you go into the Mulsanne kink, and then you slow all the way down for this corner right here, which is a 90-degree turn, is the Mulsanne corner. Then you come around this direction here to this turn right here, which is my personal favorite, the Indianapolis turn. It is a banked curve with bricks underneath, much like the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. That's why it's called Indianapolis. I'm from Indianapolis, so I grew up 3 blocks from the track, so that's why it's my favorite. Then you come down here to the Arnage, and then you head this direction. Now, this section right here is called the Maison Blanche because there is literally a white house on the side of the road. You turn left here, and then you curve towards the right back towards the pits. The area that we particularly care about for this crasher is this stretch right here. Just before the pits, there's a slight right turn here as you're coming up the hill after a very brief straight. This is the area right here that we specifically care about during this particular disaster. So in order to understand this situation, there were 3 cars involved in this crash. There was the blue number 26 of Lance Macklin in an Austin Healey that was a lower class and a slower car. There was the green number 6 of Mike Hawthorne, who was a Ferrari. It was in the top class and was incredibly fast. And then there was the silver number 20 of Pierre Levay, who was in a Mercedes-Benz and was also in the top class, moving incredibly quickly. So one of the things you have to understand is that at 1955, there were 2 different types of technologies for brakes for cars. There was the drum brakes, which was the old technology that was still being used by some of the racers at the time. Essentially, there was a drum that was contained, and inside were two brake pads. And when the brake in the car was pressed, it would push those brake pads against the outside of the drum and slow the car down. But the problem was that inside that drum, there was no ventilation. So if you pressed on the brake too hard, all of the heat from the friction of the brake pads pushing outward on the drum would build up inside the drum and cause the brakes to slip, and they wouldn't slow down the car anymore. So you couldn't slam on your brakes and come to a stop because it simply wouldn't work, too much heat, and it would fail. The other type of brakes is the one that's currently used. Is called disc brakes. There is a rotor in the middle that is a disc that goes around. There are brake pads on either side of the rotor, and when the brake is compressed, the brake pads push together on the rotor, create friction to slow the car down, but it's no longer contained, so all of the heat from that friction is able to dissipate, and it allows you to be able to slam on the brakes and stop your cars. That's what modern brakes are currently, to not have that brake failure problem when you slam on them too hard. Now, for this particular scenario, Mike Hawthorne's car had the disc brakes, but Lance Macklin and Pierre Levay both had drum brakes, so they would have to have significantly more time to slow down on a dime, because if they tried to slam on their brakes, they would continue to travel because of that heat buildup. Now, Mercedes-Benz realized this and came up with a plan to account for this brake failure that would occur if you slammed on your brakes. On the back of the actual car itself, they created what they called an air brake. Essentially, if the driver needed to brake incredibly quickly, they could slam on the brakes, and then on the back, there would be an air brake. It was basically a trunk that opened towards the front, so it would fly up like this and create drag on the car to help slow the car down faster. Now, it's important to remember that because it's going to come up here in a moment. So, I'm going to explain this to you guys before I show you on the actual images, so you have kind of an idea of what you're looking for, because this was shot in 1955, so it's incredibly blurry. I'm going to explain this to you guys before I show you the images so that you have a general idea of what's going on. So coming around towards pit lane, towards that right-hand turn I showed you in the map earlier, you have Lance Macklin, who's in front in the blue number 26. Coming up behind him at a high rate of speed is Mike Hawthorne in the green number 6. Lance Macklin in front realizes he's coming up behind him, so he moves down towards the inside of the track so Hawthorne can go around him on the outside and continue on, considering they were moving at different speeds. The problem was that as soon as Hawthorne got around the outside of Macklin, he saw his pit crew in the pits ahead waving at him that he needed to come in to get gas. So he immediately slams on the brakes and dives towards the inside in front of Macklin so that he can get to his pit and not have to go all the way around the 8-mile track again. The problem was Hawthorne could do that because he had the disc brakes. Macklin could not do that because he had the drum brakes. He knew that if he slammed on his brakes like that it would cause his brakes to fail and he would hit the back of Hawthorne anyway. So he put on his brakes and then swerved towards the middle to go around him to avoid hitting him. The problem was that Pierre Levay in the number 20 was coming up behind him on the outside of the track, and as he swerved out towards the middle of the track, Pierre Levay hit the back of his car and sent him flying into the grandstands. So if we look at this right here, I'm going to circle each car in their color. So right here in front, we have the green number 6 of Mike Hawthorne. They have already passed him, all of that. He is slowing down to go into the pits. He has no idea that Macklin is behind him. Right here, just directly behind him, is the blue number 26 of Lance Macklin, who is in the process of swerving towards the middle of the track here to avoid hitting Hawthorne. And then back here behind them, coming up unbeknownst to both cars here, is the silver number 20 of Levay. So here, just a few seconds later, we have the blue 26 of Macklin, the green 6 of Hawthorne, who has no idea what's going on because he's headed towards the pits. Now, if you watch racing, now pits have an actual wall between the racetrack and the pit lane. There was no wall between pit lane and the racetrack in this. It was just straight up open pits. So he had to be on the racetrack, and you just pulled out into the actual racing surface as soon as you were done with your pits. So we have Hawthorne here, who's coming along here. We have Macklin, who has swerved to avoid the back of Hawthorne here, and then we have Levay, who's coming up right here. Now, at this point, Pierre Levay probably knows right in here that Macklin is coming at him and is likely trying to put on his brake and possibly his air brake before he smacks into the back of Macklin. Unfortunately, he would not have enough time. Here you can see Macklin's car, and unfortunately, the back of Macklin's car was kind of curved down. So essentially, Pierre Levay's car used it as a ramp and was launched into the air before landing on the wall right here. Now, this was not really a wall. It was more of an earthen embankment that was kind of there that had some advertisements across the front of it. And then just on the back side of this, you can't really see. Let's use a different color. Just on the back side of this here is the start of the grandstands. Essentially, as you came out of that corner, if you continued on a straight line, you would end up in the middle of the grandstands. Levay's car would be launched into the air. You can see Macklin's car right here. Levay's car is in this blurry mess right here. And then if you see this right here, this is not the hood of Levay's car. It is the air brake that was ripped off. It would go flying through the air as a frisbee in front of the stands and would end up several rows up in the grandstands, causing people to be beheaded in this area. The air brake itself caused several of the deaths in the stands as it literally frisbeed through the air. Now, after Levay's car came flying through the air, it would land on the actual wall right here. You can see it here. As he himself, Pierre Levay himself, was launched out of the car this direction, as pieces of his car, part of the axle is in this area, part of the hood is over in this area, was launched into the actual stands themselves. It would then fall right about here and explode into flames. You can see the burning remains of Levay's car here, and this right here is where Levay's body landed after he was launched from the vehicle. Now, part of the problem with this particular car is the body itself was made out of a magnesium alloy. And if you know anything about magnesium, once it starts burning, it continues to burn, and putting water on it makes that fire worse. So, as people drove by and as rescue workers were trying to get into this area, they had this giant burning car on fire that no one could put out until it burned itself out. In addition, race officials decided that because there were so many deaths and injuries that they needed to deal with, stopping the race and having all of the spectators that were at the track at the time leave at the same time would clog up the roads for ambulances. So they allowed the race to continue. So as racers were driving by, they were driving past the burning remains of one of their fellow racers' vehicles, and several of them didn't know that Pierre Levay had died and that his body was still laying on the racetrack as they drove past. Now, if you're looking at these screenshots and you're thinking, man, those look really close, and one of those looks like it's right on pit road, that's because it was. The man with the camera who caught one of the best images of the actual crash itself was standing on pit road. And Lance Macklin's car, which you can see right here, missed him by like 3 feet. So real quick, let's run through the whole crash here. Launches into the air, goes through the crowd. And then, here in just a second, there's the car, smacks the wall. You can see Macklin jump out instantly. Now, the reason Macklin jumped out of here instantly is because he also knew that these cars caught on fire. And if you were stuck in this car and it was on fire, you were not going to survive. So he instantly jumps out and tries to get away from it. He, at this point, has no idea that his fellow racer Pierre Levay is dead. He has no idea that 81 people in the stands are dead. The only thing he knows is that he hit him and was hit by someone else. Now, one of the things that he talked about in the aftermath of the disaster is that the only thing he ever realized to know that he was hit from behind was he felt a sudden lurch from behind, and then he felt a really hot gust of air. What he felt was Levay's exhaust going over the top of his head, missing his head by inches. None of them are wearing helmets. They're wearing caps. Like, they're not wearing racing helmets. All of this is open. So he felt the actual heat from Levay's exhaust as his car flew over the top of him. In addition to that, when LeVay's car launched up in the air, it would hit a concrete staircase and then land on the wall. There were people standing next to that wall, between the wall and the staircase where his car landed, who had the car fly over top of them and could feel the heat from the car as it sailed over top of them before it exploded just a few feet down the wall. But in addition to the air brake frisbeeing through the crowd, which is horrifying enough, all of the heavy parts of the car also came apart. So the engine, several of the axles also plowed into the crowd and caused deaths and injuries. One of the, I guess, horrifying stories to come out of this is there were several drivers that were standing on pit road getting ready to take over their section of the race to continue driving. One of those was a driver by the name of Duncan Hamilton. He was standing on pit wall getting ready to go when he saw the crash occur. And because of the violence of the crash and how much of the vehicle had torn off, and several people were caught in the actual wheels of LeVay's car as it swung by, it flung several bodies onto the actual track itself. So as he's standing there, all of a sudden landing in front of him is the dead body of a man. The next thing he knows, his car pulls up, the driver hops out, he steps over the dead man, because that's what you did in 1955, and then continued on racing. There were several things like that. There was one woman who had her dress caught by one of LeVay's tires and was flung a good distance onto the track, landing in the middle of it. People were finding headless bodies in various locations around the grandstands. It was a brutal scene. It only took about 30 minutes to confirm 63 deaths. It usually takes significantly longer than that unless there is significant trauma, and there was significant trauma in this situation. Now, in the aftermath of the crash, the race obviously continued on, as I said earlier, for 4 reasons. They didn't want all the spectators to leave all at once and clog the roads. The British had an airshow accident that killed 30 spectators, and of course the French weren't going to stop theirs. The racing teams could have sued them for lots of money. And number 4, which was actually said by the race director, the race must go on. Now, for Mercedes, they eventually decided to pull from the race itself. Number 1, because it would be a terrible look for a German automobile manufacturer to continue to race after dozens of French died. Because winning a French race after a bunch of French people died, as well as a French driver died in a German car, would likely not have gone over well in post-war Europe, since, the end of World War II was only 10 years prior. And it would take until 1:45 in the morning for Mercedes to make the decision, and the crash happened around 7:30 p.m., but they did eventually pull all of their drivers after running in first and third place. Jaguar also was asked to pull by Mercedes, and they told them no and to go away. In the aftermath of this, Mercedes-Benz withdrew from all motor racing until 1989 as a direct result of this crash, and several countries banned motorsports racing for the next year until safety improvements could be made. Switzerland banned auto racing, period, until June of 2022, specifically because of this crash. On the aftermath of the disaster, there was an inquiry as to who was at fault for the accident. It ended up being ruled just simply a tragic accident, and that no one was at fault. Now, of course, Jaguar blamed Mercedes and Austin Healey by saying that LeVay and Macklin were not competent drivers, and that Macklin's move to get around Hawthorne was dangerous, and that LeVay was not fit to be racing in his car as fast as the one he was driving, the 300 SLR. Mercedes blamed Jaguar and said that Hawthorne cut off Macklin and caused the accident by being careless with his braking and waiting until the very last second to pit. Looking at the video footage and having grown up watching racing and being around racetracks, it is really hard to blame anyone but Hawthorne, as he really didn't give Macklin any option but to either hit the back of his car or send it into the dirt or try and go around him in the middle of the track. In a split-second decision like that, Macklin had no good options. Does he want to put his car in the inside wall to prevent him from hitting Hawthorne? Does he want to hit Hawthorne anyway? Does he want to try and go around Hawthorne in the hopes that no one's coming up behind him? Unfortunately, he picked the one that would save his car, but it was also the one that was going to cause a massive accident and end up killing a bunch of people, simply because he didn't have any better options. In addition, after the crash, the driver who was the co-driver for Pierre Levay was a man named John Fitch. After this crash, he immediately retired from racing. However, he did go on to become an engineer and designed the guardrails that are seen in almost every country that have saved probably thousands of lives at this point. And he also designed the sand-filled barrels seen at the end of guardrails on highways that act as crash energy absorption. So he stepped away from racing and then ended up saving thousands of lives with his inventions. In addition, almost as soon as the race was over, the track in Le Mans was immediately upgraded to make it safer. They widened pit road considerably, which removed that kink that caused the crash itself to not have to make that right-hand turn. They tore down the grandstands that were at the edge of that corner and then made a deacceleration lane for pit road so you wouldn't have the same issue happen again. They also moved the grandstands back significantly and then built a ditch to separate the track further from the stands themselves. So they made significant upgrades. And since then, they have made even more upgrades to make the track significantly safer.